So what this recording is going to do for us is, it says missing information. I don't understand what that means. Okay, hopefully it's still recording. Um, so what the recordings will do for us is that if you, for whatever reason, need to miss a class, you'll be able to see the recording via YouTube after the facts. Granted, it's not going to record. I don't believe, for example, it records what goes on in the breakout rooms, which I'll get to in a second. But it will record whatever is on my screen, and it will also record the chat. So one thing that I'll say about the chat, the recording also serves another function in that the way that we're going to do attendance is once I've started the recordings like I did today, um, what I want everybody to do is to type into the chat your full name and then present, and then that counts for your attendance. That's that's a record of your attendance um, for today. And what that does is that once this recording is finished, what happens is it generates a text file with the chat in it, so that I can save that file, and then I can open that up um, later on, and I can see who typed that they were present, in essence, right? So that's my record for your attendance for today. Um, so let me back up a little bit. Um, so I'm Kurt. I'm the instructor for the course. I've been teaching freshman English in one form or another for about 22, 23 years at various schools around the country. Um, I've been with Tamusa. This is the begin. I'm going on. So I started in 2016, whatever that means. So go. I'm not a math person, right? So in essence, I started when we brought freshmen, when we brought in our first freshman class, which incidentally that class is now um, graduated. A number of them have anyway. So so anyway, I came in at the what amounted to the beginning of the freshman writing program and so forth. So we're now entering kind of another phase of the freshman writing program in a number of ways. Um, but you all are a part of that, and this is a great thing. Um, so I'll kind of talk a little bit about, before we get into the syllabus and everything, which we will do here in a minute. I'll kind of talk a little bit about kind of the philosophy behind integrated reading and writing in 1301 and so on. So um, basically the idea is to really help you and frankly to help myself, because we're regardless of however long we've been doing whatever we've been doing, there's always room for development and refinement, deeper development, and so on. So I'm of the opinion that one never stops learning, or one hopefully shouldn't stop learning, that one always has more opportunity to refine one's skills and so forth. So, frankly, what excites me about being in the classroom, whether it's virtual classroom because of the pandemic, or our traditional classroom, is the opportunity to learn and explore ideas in different ways that maybe I haven't thought of before, or learn new techniques, you know, about something is one would assume is rudimentary as reading, but reading, as we'll find out, is not really necessarily rudimentary. It's actually a very dynamic and potentially engaging and fulfilling process. And so that's what we're going to explore, really, is and ultimately, you know, how to make reading more enjoyable, less riddled with anxiety, right? Because who needs more anxiety in one's life, honestly, especially right now with um, so I caught the I'm also not a time person necessarily. I mean, I'm frankly, I'm doing well to jump on here at the correct time. I've got like three alarms or something, that tell me, okay, it's time to get on Zoom for class. Okay, I made it on time, right? So, I'm doing well with that. So, but I'm not always a time person, uh, at least, and there's lots of things we can say about time too. I mean, some people might say that time is arbitrary because, or at least, or not the necessarily the passage of time, but the recording of time. One could say is arbitrary because you know here in San Antonio it's what, 9. Damn, I've been like jammering on for almost 10 minutes. Okay, so it's 9:39 here by this clock that I'm looking at. Well, in California, um, you know, it's I believe they're what, two. Some of you are going to be more expert than I am, but I believe it's like they're what, like 2 hours behind us or something like that, right? So I mean, the record the and I was looking at a. Thank you very much. Hope. Yeah. Yes. 2 hours behind us. Um, and I apologize if I don't catch stuff that goes on in the chat immediately. Um, I use a couple of different devices for Zoom, depending on what I may be doing. For example, like right now, I'm using a Surface Pro because the Surface Pro is better with screen share, and I'm gonna do some screen share here in a minute. Um, but I also at times will use an iPad, and for example, the controls, the interaction with Zoom on the screen, the user interface is completely different. And so, for example, on the iPad, the user interface shows up in one place on the screen, whereas on the Surface Pro it shows up in another. So it's a bit odd, just figuring stuff out here. The other advantage, incidentally, of having and I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but this just came to mind, and I do want to mention this. So another advantage of having the courses, or the classes, I should say, recorded on YouTube is that YouTube will caption everything automatically once it's uploaded and processed. YouTube captions everything, and it's fairly accurate. So if you are hearing impaired, for example, that will be an option for you, is to watch the videos, the YouTube videos. You go back through and look at those. Um, but again, well, I haven't said this, but I'm never going to ask anybody to disclose one's disability, to reveal anything that is potentially triggering, anything like that. So if you choose to disclose sensitive stuff in your writing and so forth, that is completely up to you. But it's not something that I'm going to demand of you. So now, in terms of the Office of Disability Accommodations and so forth, that's different. Like if you have a particular accommodation, they will send me if you've communicated with them, they'll send me documentation and ask and direct me, as far as your accommodation. Of course, you can also reach out to me individually. Even so, with an Office of Disability Accommodations letter, they do not reveal in that letter what one's disability actually is, I should say what one's diagnosis actually is. So, again, that kind of stuff is your um, privacy, right? And it's your prerogative as to whether or not you want to reveal that. Um, okay, so um, because again, the purpose of these courses is to make you comfortable and to show you really how empowered you actually are in terms of your own signification, right? Signification meaning the ascribing meaning, the ascribing of meaning, right, to your environment, to the world around you, right? Um, how skilled, in fact, you actually are with figuring out what the hell is going on in your world, right? Um, and it's something that each of us do constantly. And it's a skill that we've been using probably since in developing, probably since the age of 2, if not before, right? And we're constantly evolving experts in this capacity, depending upon the environment in which we find ourselves. The only difference, between, for example, something that you all may be familiar with, like if you're at a party or something, or you're hanging out, and you see somebody, trying to advance on your significant other. Maybe they haven't said anything, but you can kind of see by their bodily movement, or gestures or whatever, hey, something may be going on here, or whatever, or vice versa, maybe, something like that. Or maybe your significant other sees you making those motions. I don't know, but what I'm trying to say here is that um, we can kind of we can make inference uh, based on the data, the available data, the information that we're perceiving. Right. This is something that we do all the time, and oftentimes it's a survival skill. Right. If you've been in very tense situations and you realize, hey, something's about to go down here, I need to get out of the way, I need to not be here when something's about to go down. Oftentimes it's a feeling. It could be, based on, the way people are grouping together, or whatever, right? Um, you know, I mean, that it's a very human thing. It's a very mammalian thing. This is all. The only difference is when we're reading, right, or whatever. It's just that we're interacting with text, as opposed to being in our environment and so forth in other capacities. But it's the same sort of skill set. So that's kind of what we're going to be developing in this sort of academic arena, in this sort of textual arena. Um, so, um, and we'll begin to understand that reading is actually, as I said previously, a very dynamic act. It's actually, when you read a text, and text is more I should say written text on a page or on a screen is not the only definition of text. Philosophically speaking, and depending upon one's point of view, anything that you interpret, anything that you on which you ascribe meaning, right, is a text, because actually you're reading it, you're taking it in, you're taking in the information, and you're processing it, and you're ascribing meaning onto that item or that thing that you're reading, whether it be text, whether it be a person, right, whether it be an object, whatever it might be, right. Um, and incidentally, that's kind of that's actually how education works. Education does not occur, right? As I'm speaking, education is not occurring, right? Education occurs when you take in what I'm speaking and you process that information, right? And as you're processing that information, you're making decisions, you're evaluating what I am saying, right? And you're either saying, okay, he's got a valid point here, or whatever, or you're saying he's full of shit, or you're saying, okay, I'm going to give this guy a benefit of the doubt. I'm just going to, and so on and so forth. But in any case, you're processing the information. Education occurs, true education occurs within. It occurs individually and it occurs within. And it occurs within when you make a decision, when you categorize, when you ascribe meaning, when you ascribe value, right, upon that information, right. So what I'm saying to you might be a catalyst for education, but it in fact is not education in and of itself, right. So the same thing is true um, when it comes to reading. When you read, what's actually going on, so you have various factors. One factor is the text itself, right, the text on the screen or on the page, right. um, the other factor is there's so many factors. One factor is the author, right. And there's a whole lot, there's an entire whole schools of thought about, well, when does the author's influence, does the author's intent and so on and so forth, does that even matter after the author has finished writing the piece, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to get into all that. The fact of the matter is that some human being at some point put pen to paper, metaphorically speaking, or typed into a keyboard, whatever, this particular text. And so that particular person's point of view, that particular person's environment, and so on and so forth, the occasion in which it was written, all that, right? At some point in the creation of that text, all of that mattered. All of that had influence into that text, right? So that's there, and then they create the text, and the text itself becomes an artifact. The text itself becomes this thing, this item that's out here, right? Um, but that's not the end of the story. That's not the end of the factor. The other really important factor here, that is often discounted, right? That's often not taken into effect, is the reader, right? So, um, and I will tell you, and some of you know this to be true, right? Some of you instinctively know this to be true. Instinct is a loaded term, and we can talk about that later, maybe. Some people say there's no such thing as instinct. We can get into that later if you want, but the the point being is that each person that reads a text is going to read that text differently. Now, some people might read that text very similarly, but each person's going to read that text slightly differently because each person is in fact unique. Each person's bringing unique experiences, unique meanings to words and attributions to words, you know, to a text, right? because you've had different experiences in which you've ascribed certain meanings and certain associations to those words, right? Um, and what happens if you're reading a text and it has words you've never even seen before, right? It's going to affect your interaction with that text, right? Um, and so all of that really plays in, and all that matters because, in fact, the dynamism, the life, right, the electricity, the energy, right, in reading is this interaction between the text, which in and of itself is not quote unquote living, right? The text is an artifact. The text is like the text is like a work of art. It exists. But what happens is, as you are reading it, what you're in fact doing in your mind, in your consciousness, whether you realize it's active or not, is you are recreating that text in your mind. That text, when you are reading it, becomes something. The reading is an act of creation. You're creating a version of that text for yourself in your mind. That is in fact different than the author's version of that text. Doesn't invalidate the author's version of that text, but what I'm saying is that each reader is actively creating, germinating, breathing life into this document or this text within one's mind, within one's self. So, um, yes. So that's a very good point. Um, yeah, people that really get into, specifically, like, for example, reading fiction, right? Uh, you know, People that really just dive into reading fiction, for example, they're able to do that because they do see it as kind of like a, if you will, and this is going to sound very kind of frou-frou perhaps to some of us, but not entirely unfounded. This idea of like a shamanistic journey, like if you're reading a text and you're allowing you're sort of creating, visualizing, if you will, through reading, you're creating this entrance, right, into another state of consciousness, and so on. So people sometimes will experience reading as a meditative act, um, and it becomes very relaxing for them, and so on. Um, that is not necessarily the case for some of us too, and sometimes it depends on what we're reading, right, and the occasion upon which we're reading. Um, I'll speak to that in just a second, but I knew a Shakespeare scholar. I used to work with a Shakespeare scholar that said that he enjoys reading because reading is an opportunity for him to meet new people, right? And by people, he actually was referring to fictional characters in plays or stories, right, or whatever. But his imagination, made the recreated those characters so real, made them so dynamic, that for him it was like interacting with people, you know. Um, and that's really beautiful and really, just amazing, but it can also be dangerous in a sense, right? Um, um, for example, our now former president Donald Trump, many people voted for him in 2016 because they thought they were voting for the fictional character from The Apprentice, right? They did not, in their minds, differentiate. This is not necessarily the fault of the voter, right? This was all very much put out there. Um, Yeah, because you don't find it interesting. That's going to be a very good point, which I will speak to in just a minute. I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. Um, but like, for example, people saw The Apprentice and they thought, wow, this dude is like concise, and like, he works with everybody, he's got, and so on and so forth. This dude would make a good president, whatever. That fictional character of Donald Trump on The Apprentice is very carefully constructed, you know, by the producers of that show, et cetera, et cetera. That character, right? That Donald Trump of The Apprentice is not a real person, right? But people thought that's who they were, voting for as their president, rather than the individual Donald Trump. So we have to be very cautious too about ascribing a fiction onto, if we're reading something, for example, about a flesh and blood person, ascribing a whole lot of fiction onto that person. Um, Things have been said like that about, for example, Dr. King. We just celebrated his or commemorated, some of us celebrated, some of us just, commemorated his birthday uh, Monday, right? So, you know, some people say that the danger of having, a holiday based on somebody's birthday, whether it be Dr. King's birthday or President's Day or whatever the day may be, that when we begin to do things like that, what happens is that we deify the person. We make them something more than human, right? The danger there is to say that, well, Dr. King accomplished this stuff, but he was Dr. King. Who am I? I'm just a person, right? Well, bottom line is Dr. King was an incredible person. He was a beautiful, wonderful human being, but he was also a very flawed human being and a very complex human being. And so, given that, we look at ourselves and we say we are also very flawed human beings. But given Dr. King's example, for just using Dr. King as an example, we can also accomplish great things. We can also accomplish great things. Dr. King, is not a deity, right? Dr. King is not, this, so on and so forth, right? So, the relationship between um, myth, right? And myth doesn't necessarily mean untrue. Myth in the academic sense means a system of ordering things, the system of making things have how things make sense. And so, but Dr. King sort of, you know, placing him kind of like on this on like a pedestal like that. It in some ways diminishes the man. You know. Anyway, that's just an idea. But so but when we encounter a text, there are also other factors too. Like, for example, how are we looking at the text? Are we looking at it in like a old, paperback book that's falling apart, that the pages are barely stuck together, and really, really small type, and all that? That's going to affect how we're encountering the text. Are we looking at it on a screen, like a big screen with like high definition, so on? Are we looking at it like I've got the screen that I'm communicating with you on right now is actually fairly small. I don't have a like a traditional computer set up here remotely. I have the Surface Pro and I have an iPad, so it's fairly small, but it's functional. Um, right. So all these factors matter. Also, too, you know, how are you feeling? When you're reading. Uh, are you hungry? Are you sick? Do you have to pee? Like, I mean, what's going on in your body? What's going on in your mind? At the time that you're reading it, what's going on in your life at the time that you're reading it? All that stuff is gonna have an effect, right? Um, I had a professor you know, is a real hard ass, but a real kind of funny in his kind of a sarcastic way, funny guy. But anytime that I would mention certain poets in class, right, he would start talking about his ex-wife. You know, so, obviously the man had some unresolved issues, but for whatever reason, certain poets he reminded him of his ex-wife, and he could not get past certain blocks. Just like certain works of literature, or even certain mythological systems, like belief systems and whatever, like pantheons and different things. Uh, it's harder for me to relate to, because I don't like extreme cold. So if I'm reading about like um ice, like just areas of the world where you have 4 months of solid winter and nobody goes outside. I I'm not too enthusiastic about that. It's like or Moby Dick, for example, which is an absolutely fabulous novel. But it took me till I had to read it for an oral exam, um, uh, in in graduate school, to actually read it, because the idea of reading like a 600 some page novel. Uh, yes, it's wonderful. It's a great novel, but I just had this block. It took me like over a decade to actually read the book, because the idea of like reading about life on a ship for that long, just it was not appealing to me, because I've had I had some negative experiences on boats as a young kid. um, you can't see, obviously, on the screen here, but I use a wheelchair, right, and have had a disability, since I was, for my life, right. So my mom used to date these, and pardon the expression, but my mom used to date these rednecks, and they would try to impress her by like putting her like disabled kid on the boat, with them and shit. So they put me on the so I got in this boat, and of course, this hairy redneck dude that just wanted to have sex with this poor, single mom. So gets out on his boat and like revs up the engine or whatever, so this little boat is like bouncing up and smacking down onto the water, repeatedly. And here I am at the bottom of the boat, and I'm feeling like every impact of these waves. you know that's it, that stuck with me. That stuck with me. Just like I love horses as creatures. I think they're beautiful. I think they're wonderful creatures. I do not want to ride a horse, because when I was in Boy Scouts at like 11, I was a fat kid. I was quite heavy, and they put me, the fat disabled kid, on the old horse, and they did not secure the saddle very well, and I didn't fall off the horse, but I thought I was going to. So that, again, these types of experiences stick with us, right? So my point in this, aside from just using your time to talk about the foibles of my life, is to show that we bring with us to a text our experiences, right? We bring with us our experiences. Um, so in any case, um, that's my point. So what I'm getting at is that it's just to emphasize that reading is a dynamic is a dynamic experience, right? We tend to think of it as passive. In fact, I'm perhaps more guilty of this than any of you, is that I will be reading a text, reading something while I'm doing like three other things. And while that may be quote unquote necessary given the type of world that we live in, it isn't. It certainly just detracts from the experience, right? Detracts from the experience of reading. So, um, let me do some screen share here so we can move into talking about our syllabi. Um, so what I have here, and these are on our individual pages right now. Um, Here's our syllabus for 1300. This is and so technically this is 9:30 to 10:45. But again, as I was saying, really the two sections are fluid. Um, so, we can move from an activity that's quote unquote designated for 1300 into an activity that's designated for 1301. And it doesn't really matter, if we start that 1301 activity at 10 o'clock or we started at 10:45. It just depends on what we're doing and how something may flow at the time. But the idea is that we're emphasizing these skill sets across the two courses. um, where's my cursor? Okay, so this number right here is my Zoom code. It's a code to this is for my virtual office. So if you want to have an appointment with me for any reason, you would type this in. This is the code you would use. Um, the quickest way to get a hold of me is through this number here. This is a Google Voice number. It I only use it to communicate with students. So if I get a text on that number, unless it's spam like a robocaller or something, which believe it or not, still come through on Google Voice, I know it's going to be a student. So I don't call me on it unless I know ahead of time that you're going to call me on it. But definitely you can text me on this number at any time. Um, okay. Um, I have in the past, on occasion, used it for dating sites as well because I was somebody might be a little shady and I didn't want them to have my actual number. But I'm not messing with the dating sites right now, so I know that that's not going to happen. Uh, anyway, again, and I do recommend that if you're going to be on a dating site, don't ever give out your actual number. Please, 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 don't ever give out your actual number to anybody you meet on a dating site unless you've met them physically in person uh, at least a few times. Don't give out your actual number. That's free advice for everybody from an old person. Okay, don't. And I'm quite older than I look. I look good for my age, in my opinion. Of course, I could be narcissistic as well, but anyway. Uh, so I'll basically meet with you like anytime you need, unless I happen to be in class or a meeting. But typically speaking, Tuesdays are actually the best. The next best day is Friday, but again, if I'm not in a meeting or something, and you need to meet with me at another time, I can really try to work on that for you. Um, all right. So our goals for this particular section, different forms of reading, right? And there are different ways. It's just like, for example, so reading a work of fiction is is different than perhaps reading like an academic work, like in an academic journal or something like that, in the sense that it's going to be written differently. There's going to be different language use. There's going to be set up differently, and so on. They're going to expect you to come in with like different presets of knowledge, perhaps, um, and so on. Um, and it's perhaps decoding it differently, if you will, translating it differently, um, different quote unquote key rhetorical keys, if you will, to unlock what they're talking about, to help you generate it in your mind, and so on and so forth, and help you interact with it. And we all know this to be true, right? For example, um, if you've ever been the only person of your ethnicity in a situation where everybody else was a different ethnicity, and you weren't quite sure of how to interact with these people, they weren't quite sure how to interact with you, even though you're all in the same place at the same time, breathing the same air, so on and so forth. Uh you know I'll give you an example. So the first time I went to an all black church, uh you know the, I came in there, and for like the first 5 or 10 minutes, just about everybody in there was sizing me up, and I understood why. I absolutely understood why. But everybody in there was kind of like sizing me up, being like, what's this guy about? What's this about? After about 5-10 minutes, everybody was cool, and they realized I was not there to disrupt or to somehow judge, their culture, what they had going on, that I actually was legitimately interested in participating and so on, right? But yeah, and so metaphorically speaking, the first time, or the first few times perhaps even, that you encounter like an academic journal, for example, it might be, that might be an analogous experience for you, where you're like, okay, this is in English, I understand it's in English, but what the hell are they trying, what is what the hell, what is, what's being said here, right? it's not that it's that because you don't initially vibe with that environment, the environment of that text, that doesn't mean that it's somehow a reflection on your intelligence or anything like that. Or it just means it's unfamiliar, right? It just means that you haven't been shown the tools to unpack that or unlock that. It's like, if you were a fish and you've been living in water your whole life, and all of a sudden you were told, okay, you got to go live on land now, but we're not going to give you any kind of breathing apparatus, we're not going to give you anything, you just got to go live on land. Well, it doesn't work real well, right? So that's where we get down into here, right? Audience, purpose, and context. So when reading, we can think about, who is the original audience for this particular piece. Who's this written for, right? Because that's going to determine a lot, right? It's going to determine a lot. Like, you know, what baseline knowledge the people that are reading this particular text, what is that knowledge? You know, what knowledge are they supposed to have to be able to read this? And do I have this knowledge? Do I need to like do a quick Google? I mean, Normally in the pure academic sense, I'd say, Google is not the best or whatever. But in practical reality, I do it myself. I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna be on a high horse here, right? If there's a term I don't understand or something like that, and believe me, it happens a lot. It may happen to me once a day or a couple times a week, where because I read, I find myself reading a lot of diverse stuff, and some stuff, from the 19th century or the 18th century, where I'll come across a term and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what this term means, or I don't know what this term means in this context of this statement, right? So my ass is like Googling it. I mean, and that's a perfectly fine. If that gets you enough information to understand the context that the in which the author is communicating a particular point, that's wonderful, and I recommend that you do that. If you run across a who the hell is calling me? Okay, that's a 1-800 number or some crap. So that was a robocall or something. Um, all right, that was on the Google Voice number, so I know it was. Yeah. Anyway, uh, and again, this next thing is what we've already been talking about: activating your prior knowledge. What are you bringing to this? What and oftentimes you can bring a very unique and wonderful point of view to something. For example, um, I was teaching classical literature to a group of students, much like yourselves. And there was a gentleman in the class, and he was a quote unquote older student. He was actually older than me, and he had been an active duty military for quite some time, and he'd been discharged. He'd been honorably discharged and everything, med boarded, because he'd had PTSD and some other things. Um, but he was we were reading the Odyssey, and some of you may or may not be familiar with the Odyssey. The Odyssey used to be standard, and see, this is another thing, right? Uh, the Odyssey and the Iliad and works of, and y'all may not know what I'm talking about, but works of sort of standard works of Greek mythology. These used to be standard in middle school, right? So in like seventh grade, you would look at like the Odyssey and the Iliad, and then you would like read excerpts from the Odyssey and the Iliad, like say in ninth grade, and so on and so forth, so that people could have general conversations and reference the Odyssey and the Iliad, and people who had graduated from high school would understand, at least have a baseline understanding of what that was. That's no longer the case. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that's no longer the case, because I was talking to someone who is actually quite intelligent, very, really one of the quickest witted people that I know. She's like 22, and she's the young woman that cleans my cell that I live in. I live in a cell in the ghetto, like not too far from campus, actually. We had somebody, just by example, we had somebody shoot off an AK-47 here in the parking lot not too long ago. So that's over where, and we had like this firework competition between this dude across the street and somebody up here in the apartment complex on New Year's Eve. So it sounded like a war zone. Anyway, but y'all know what I'm talking about if you live here on the South Side. I'm quite sure. Um, but uh, but anyway, so I mentioned something about the Odyssey in passing reference to the young woman that cleans my cell for me. Um, and I pay her to do it. Like, this isn't some kind of pity thing or something. Like, I actually pay her. But but um but anyway, she had no idea what I was talking about. And I was like, and it really surprised me. It really surprised me. Um, so it may be, so a lot of the, so one's knowledge base may not be there, and it's no fault of yours. It's no fault that you just weren't taught these things that used to be very, very standard, like the Odyssey and the Iliad. And you know uh and I, I went to high school. I was in high school in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was not taught things that had previously been standard from previous generations to me. Like, for example, there was a time in American education and essentially Western education, if you will, the Western world, about 250 years ago, which in the grand scheme of things, that seems like a long time to us, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not really a long time. But at that time, the study of Latin was fairly common. At least a baseline kind of understanding of Latin. Um, Someone is okay. That is an interesting. Hold on. I'm sorry. This is a. I apologize for doing this. It's another instructor. There's some wires crossed about a meeting. All right. So, all right. Where was I? So, reading across genres and modalities. Okay, we kind of covered that. Um, Understand and critique conversations, origin and purpose of ASE. So that's in a way what I'm talking about. So translanguaging, right? That's an interesting concept. I mean, I say interesting concept. It's an interesting phrasing or phraseology or word, right? Um, Translanguaging. All that really means is that everyone has sort of this varieties of language resources that they pull from. You know, and you can pull from multiple language resources simultaneously. For example, if you grew up speaking Spanish, right? That is a language tool that you have. Um, we all speak English. That's a and that's a, and read and write English, etc. That's language tools that we have. Um, in my case, I've studied French and Old English, and some Sanskrit, so on and so forth. So all in any case, those are all language tools that I have that I can draw upon, right? Uh, you know, Not to mention the different kinds of Englishes and different kinds of Spanish and so forth that you may speak and be familiar with, because we all know, we all experience that there are different circumstances call for different uses of language. We all know this, right? Most of us are not going to speak the same way to our. I mean, my grandparents are deceased, but no, most of us are not going to speak the same way to our grandparents, for example, that we would to our best friend. We're just not, unless your grandparent happens to be your best friend and they're just really cool and they don't whatever. But most of the time, that's not going to be the case, right? There's going to be a level of respect there, perhaps, that there isn't really with like your best friend, or your sibling, right? um we've already been talking about the reading process, so we're well underway as far as talking about that. um the relationship between reading and writing, so we've begun to talk about that as well. um Ethical responsibilities of readers and writers. That's kind of what I was getting at. I mean, an example of that would be what I was getting at with, say, understanding the difference between the character Donald Trump and the person Donald Trump, right? And understanding the difference between, you know, what is factual and what isn't, even when an untruth is presented as a truth, right? I'll give you an example, and this is not a political statement. This is actually kind of sad and kind of hilarious. A couple of years ago, obviously before the pandemic, I was in class, and I just brought up. We were talking about um, alternative facts and whatnot, and I brought up flat Earth because I actually met a flat earther. Like, and I mean, this dude was like, and this was not a student. This is somebody I met outside of the university entirely. But he was absolutely 100% convinced of flat Earth, and he was also, incidentally, convinced that the Holocaust didn't happen. Right. Um, but but uh, and in both instances, right, he was referencing these websites and all this kind of stuff, and I brought that up to my students, and my students, a couple of my students in the classroom were like, but have you seen the website, talking about flat Earth, not about the Holocaust, but they say, have you seen the website, man? Their websites are like, their websites are just freaking, their websites are great, man. They're just good. So what was going on is that the student was looking at the quality of the web production, the quality of the interaction with the website, the quality of the interface of the website, not at the knowledge being presented, not at the information that was being presented, but rather in the package in which the information was being presented, and judging the information, evaluating the information based on the package in which it was being presented, rather than the information itself, right? Um, but that, and so we see the fallacy there. We see the problem with that. We see the issue with that. Um, you know, it's the whole wolf in sheep's clothing idea, right? Or you know, but that also points to, what I was talking about, the way in which we receive a text, how that influences how we perceive it, and how valid we perceive it, and how well we warm up to it, and how well we interact with it, right? Like, as much as much as I like, for example, the Declaration of Independence, um, it's difficult to read, at least for me, because of, being a 20th 21st century person. It's difficult for me to read the original document of the Declaration of Independence, for example, because it's handwritten. I hate reading handwriting. I don't like it. It's difficult. You know, and my eyes are not. I can see. I paid a lot of money for my glasses. I can see, but my eyes are not super. And so looking at somebody's handwriting, I'm not going to have a very positive experience with that necessarily. Versus looking at a typed version of the Declaration of Independence. You know, and so how I am presented with that text, especially initially, if I'd never read it before, I'd never seen it before, it's gonna affect how I am imbibing it, right? How I'm interacting with it. For example, that's why we have that's why, for example, this is, and I'm not making it. This is not a theological statement. This is a statement of observation. Is that we have who knows how many translations of the Bible in English, for example, right? Why? Because each translation is going to appeal to a different audience, right? I mean, if all there were in some in granted in some traditions, in schools of thought, there's only like one valid translation of the Bible or whatever. But if all there was like one translation of the Bible, probably have a problem, because King James just doesn't appeal to everybody. You know, uh, same thing is true. A text that I've spent a lot of time with especially over the past 20 years, is the Bhagavad Gita, and I probably have probably around 6 or 7 translations of the Bhagavad Gita. Right? Why? Because each translation is nuanced a little bit differently. Each translation is intended either to appeal to a different audience, or that particular translator is trying to emphasize a different aspect of the original, right? Um, you know, so so going back to my narrative here, hopefully I'm not wasting your time this morning. I've been talking for an hour. I've been talking for an hour. Uh, Hopefully I haven't wasted. No, I'm not wasting your time. But going back to my original my example, so these students were responding to the way that information was being packaged, not to the quality of the information itself. Now here's the punchline, right? Here's where it gets really funny. Uh, there was a student in the class from Africa, and he just starts laughing, and he looks over at his buddy who's sitting in the classroom, and he says, "Man," he's like, "I've looked on your Facebook. I know you posted that flat Earth stuff." He said that's not real. He said I've the Earth is round. I've flown around the Earth. It is round. It was just it that I mean that was just great. I mean, that was, because how is somebody going to refute that? How is somebody going to refute this guy's experience? He's actually been in a plane that has literally flown around the Earth. How is somebody going to dispute that? What So anyway, um, that's part of what we're going to do in this class is both in this one and 1301 in essence, right? Is to evaluate the quality of a text, evaluate really the validity of what it's trying to communicate. Um, uh, and ethical responsibility, right? Um, for example, um, and this is very timely. There is discussion out there about whether you know Twitter, for example, was in the right for suspending then President Trump's account, right? Um, they suspended his account for incite, trying to incite violence and so on and so forth. And so there's a question about that in reference to the First Amendment. Um, One school of thought says, well, everyone should be able to say what they want to say, and so on and so forth. Um, and in fact, it gets very complicated because the First Amendment doesn't protect an individual from, say, a it protects the individual from it protects the government from what it does is it protects the government from um, protects the individual from the government retaliating against the individual for saying something, right? Which in practice has been kind of because if you look at early American history, the Alien and Sedition they actually imprisoned people early in the history of our country for speaking against the government. We've had some really trying times in our history, but that was kind of a yucky example that early on in our history when people could actually be journalists could actually be imprisoned for things like that, and a lot of people were afraid that that's kind of the way that we were headed, or have been headed. But so that's one school of thought that people were saying, well, they shouldn't, he should be able to say what he wanted to say, et cetera, et cetera. The other school of thought, and this is the more ethical way to look at it, perhaps, and this has actually been more how the courts have kind of looked historically, and that is that, yeah, you can say what you want to say. However, there's a difference between free speech and yelling fire in a crowded theater, right? In other words, it ceases to be free speech when, in fact, violence is incited by what was said. And so anyway, but that gets into the ethical responsibility idea, you know. And in fact, um, President Trump was impeached based on this idea that he violated an ethical responsibility. So, other goals here. Teaching reading as a conversation between the author and the audience. We've talked a little bit about that already. Examining the difference between intended audience and actual audience. Right, we talked about that too. Um, you know, and and we've all experienced this, right? Because, uh, well, for example, I have a godson, and he claims that he's all about hip hop, right? And me personally, I really don't like current hip hop. I think I don't I think it just sounds like whiny. It sounds real whiny to me. Like it doesn't sound like there's a lot of there's not a lot of substance in it. Okay, but this young man, he was saying he's all about hip hop and stuff, right? So I was playing Tupac, and he said, you know, I know he was saying he before I played any Tupac, he'd never heard Tupac, right? How can somebody say that they're all about hip hop and yet they never heard a Tupac song? You know, I don't understand that. But again, you know, what he considers hip hop and what I consider hip hop are two different things. You know, but a lot of it has to do with actual audience and intended audience, right? And actually, with hip hop especially, right, that becomes very problematic because if you look at Public Enemy, for example, in the late '80s, right, they're singing, you know, Chuck D, who's amazing and brilliant, in my opinion, he was saying, you know, fight the power and so on and all that. And what he was talking about was like the white establishment and so on and so forth. Okay. But the reality was that it's like the people that were buying his tapes and so forth at the time, right, were like white rednecks and pickup trucks, you know. Those are the people that, you know, actually purchased, you know, stuff because you know they wanted to, you know, feel like they were like bucking their parents and stuff like, so because the whole thing becomes very problematic. But so the actual audience of a lot of, you know, Public Enemy's material, a lot of NWA's material, move on out to like, you know, the '90s and so, you know, the gangster rap and all that. A lot of the actual audience for that stuff was white kids. You know, the intended audience was African American kids and you know, experiencing stuff similar to what was talked about, you know, in the songs or whatever. But the actual audience, the people that were consuming it, was a lot of white kids. But, you know, you know. Anyway, it's interesting to think about. Uh, Approach reading as an active interpretation involving intersectional lenses. What's an intersectional lens? See, this is what I'm talking about the use of language. You're like, what the hell is that? Is that like something that, you know, somebody's gonna like? Am I at the eye doctor? You know, are they gonna pull out an intersectional lens? Like, what is that? Um, Anybody want to take a guess at that? Anybody? It's so intersectional lens just means that like um it's a do what? So intersectional lens just means like intersection. Like what's an intersection? It's when two things come together, like a car, like intersection at a of a road, like the two coming together, and then lens, obviously, you know, is like looking through something. So multiple ways of looking at something, when two different ways or multiple ways of looking at something come together, and so that's like involving it. That involves in part looking at a particular idea, a particular text in more than one way at one time, right? And seeing it how it can be seen in different ways simultaneously. Right. So, I mean, what you need for the course is fairly obvious. Um, Reliable internet. That's probably the most important thing, um, and often one of the most elusive things. Right, is reliable internet. Um, I know. I just, you know, the school does not pay for my internet. I just upgraded my internet. You know, in part to make sure that, you know, I don't have crazy outages. Although the building that I live in is quite old, so who the heck knows? You know, it's not as old as I am, but it's old. I'm sure it's older than a lot of you. Not that that's a bad thing. Not that that's a bad thing at all. As far as you all being younger, I was probably smarter. I was not wiser, but I was definitely smarter when I was your age than I am now. I'm probably wiser now, but I was smarter then. So there's nothing wrong at all with being young. Being young is freaking fabulous. You know, students talk about, you know, they want to travel the world, they want to do this and this. I say, do it while you're young. Do it while you're young. You know. because you may get the chance when you get much older, and then again you may not. So do that kind of stuff when you're young. Like take advantage. Use live your youth well as best you can. And I realize that a lot of us don't have that kind of advantage. Like a lot of us have to. Our youth is in fact spent taking care of family, or just working, and all that kind of stuff. But even if you're doing that and trying to go to school, that's really freaking amazing. That's very heroic. And I don't mean that glibly or lightly. That's actually very heroic, in the true sense of the word, heroic. That's living your life in a very great way. And so if you have technology issues with like logging into Blackboard and stuff like that, this number here is for that. Um, so now we actually finally, after an hour, arrive at really what the class is about. Um, I'll spend some time, or I'll ask you to spend some time. I'll read this first paragraph here, but then I'll ask you to spend some time. We may not get to it this morning, but probably next Thursday when we get into our groups. Uh, I'll ask you to maybe look at this letter, or look at this letter between now and next Thursday. It's a very well constructed letter. I did not write this letter that's in here. This was written by Dr. Scott Gage, but I included it here because it really gets at the crux of what the way that these courses are assessed is all about. So I'll just read this first part to you. Dear class, I'd like us to take a moment to consider 3 issues around the conventional grading of student writing. First, using conventional classroom grading can risk leading you to think more about acquiring grades than about your writing or learning, to worry more about pleasing me, the instructor, than about figuring out what you really want to learn, or how you want to communicate an idea that matters to you. To put it another way, if learning is what we're here for, then conventional grading can sometimes get in the way, since it prevents you, or presents you rather, with goals and motivations that may differ from the goal of learning. How can we make sure that our goal this semester aren't about grading, but about your learning and growth? So that's the essential question. Incidentally, and I'm going to try to model for you, reading some with, as we go through. You'll notice here as I was reading, I'm not the absolute best person at reading aloud, and I made a couple of mistakes there, but I just kind of flowed back over it, and then just kept going. And oftentimes that's what we have to do when we read. Is just is really interact with the text as best we can. But the central question that he's asking here is really important, and it's really what's going to lead me into what I'm going to be talking about for the next 10 or 15 minutes in terms of grading. Oh, don't get old. Well, yes, get old, because the alternative might suck. I can't necessarily speak to the afterlife, because that's not my area. I can tell you what I think about it, but that's not my area of expertise, so I'll leave that to somebody else. Um, at least while we're being recorded. But yeah, aging is. Oh, and I just dropped my screen. I just dropped my screen, so sorry about that. Yeah. Aging is interesting. It's an interesting process. It's like reverse puberty, right? It really, in a lot of ways, is. You know, you'll find probably that when you hit about 30, your body, you feel great and you're like, hey, I can conquer the world and blah, blah, blah. By the time you hit 35, your body's like, oh, I'm just kidding, not 35, 45, your body's like, oh, maybe not. So, yeah. And so, and then everything, like your hormonal, everything just begins to shift and everything kind of changes a bit. And it's an interesting experience. But anyway, um,
Excuse
so
me.
the point here, the point here is how do we see if I can. Uh, okay. The point here is, can you all hear me? Yeah, it says I'm speaking. The point here is that I don't know. I hope you can hear me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's I'm yeah, because before, okay, now my microphone is showing up as green. It wasn't showing up as green. Um okay. So the point being is that the idea is that if you're worried about a grade, right? If you're worried about, oh, am I going to get an A on this assignment or whatever, that tends to become your focus, and so your focus is less on, and I say this from experience, right? Your focus is less on what you're doing and what you're learning, and more on, oh man, I really want an A on this assignment, and I got to do better than this other person in the class who, you know, is clearly going to get an A on the assignment, and how's my stuff going to be as good as hers, and something like that, right? Um, that's less of an issue in an online environment in the sense that y'all aren't sitting next to each other in the classroom, so you don't necessarily know what somebody else is getting on their work so much, unless another person tells you, right? Um, but the point being is that um, so the idea is to take this emphasis off of the assessment of the final product so much, right? So what this course does is it asks you, and again, you can take the time to read through this letter, and I may ask you to do it in groups some next time we meet. But what this asks you to do is it asks you to be assessed based on, not on the final product, not on the final product that you produced, right? But on the labor that you put into the work. So not on the final product of the work itself, but assessed in terms of the quality of the labor that you put into the work. So there's a distinction there, right? So you've got to ask, well, how do you assess labor, right? How does one document and assess labor? So there's a number of ways to do that. And again, no grading system is perfect, right? There is no um, grading system is perfect that can be done in this temporal reality in which we live. I mean, we may, when we leave this life, we may be, have our hearts weighed against the weight against the weight of a feather, and that may be the way that we that may be the way that we're assessed, and so on. Is our labor and everything is assessed, and that may be done perfectly. We may, there may be some other form of assessment, whatever that form of assessment is. It's not done in this temporal reality in the in which we live, right? So, but in this temporal reality in which we live, there's no perfect way of grading or assessment. But what this seeks to do is it seeks to kind of level the playing field, if you will. So how how does one assess labor, right? And again, the term labor kind of bothers me because I think of like labor to me, and again, this is an example of bringing ourselves to language, right? Bringing ourselves to the written word. The term labor to me is loaded because I think of carrying bricks, or in my case, like wheeling up a hill with a big ass backpack on or something, or and I've even done it in a hill covered with ice. I don't recommend it, and I couldn't do it now. I did it in my 30s. Couldn't do it now. Uh, I was in much better shape. I was practicing martial arts, and yeah, I was in much better shape. But anyway, you know, and also of course, labor to me brings images of like concentration camps and just nasty things, right? So another way to look at it is effort, right? Effort based assessment, the effort that you're putting into it. Even though labor based is the kind of the academic term. But so how do we assess that? Number one is attending class. Why? How is that an assessment of labor? Because it takes effort, right? It takes effort to freaking show up to class. I'm sorry, it does. Because you got to organize your day. You got to like make sure your laptop is charged. You got to make sure you have internet connection. You've got to, you know, make sure that you're at least awake enough to follow what's going on and to participate. If we have any group activities, whatever, you got to be able to participate in those activities, right? That's effort. So showing up to class is part of it. um the other part of it, and another part of it, is turning everything in on time, right? That takes effort. Again, the same idea. You've got to be able to organize your time, or organize your week around when when certain assignments are due for certain classes, and so on and so forth. So turning everything on time is an example of labor. Okay. The other major component is turning in everything complete. And by complete, um, what I mean is, if I'm asking you for a 1 page document, make sure that document is 1 page. If I'm asking you for a 2 page document, make sure that document is 2 pages. Okay. Um, and as we get into successive drafts of things, like in 1301, we're not doing multiple draft pieces for the reading class, right? Because the reading class is basically support for the 1301. It can be seen as that. It can be seen as techniques to help you succeed better, have a better foundation um, for what's going for the writing in 1301. We will have activities and so forth, but the uh, activity, but the primary just writing focus will be in 1301. But as we move through successive drafts of stuff in 1301, uh, I'll ask you, for example, to have a complete, say, for the final draft of your narrative essay, which is the first big project, right? To have a complete for that, you will have to make at least two substantial changes in the document, right? So, although I'm not judging the quality of those changes per se, you still need to make the changes, right? See, so the making of those changes is the effort that goes into it, right? Um, so that's really the basis of how the course is assessed. In addition to um, in addition to the this notion of reflection. So in 1301, starting next week, not this week, you don't have anything due this week. There's nothing due in this week for either course because this is just the intro class. This is just getting started, right? Um, so starting next week in 1301 and in 1300, you'll have so in 1301 you'll have reflective essays, meaning that you're going to reflect. You're gonna um, think about and discuss in the right in your writing in cohesive essays, like in basically little essays, little 2 page essays. And again, I'm not judging the quality of these essays per se. You just need to do 2 pages of of an essay, right? But it needs to be um, talking about how you're feeling about your writing in these courses, as well as anything that you're doing in other courses. Really just how you're feeling about stuff. What basically the general thesis is, um, what has influenced your labor in the course during this particular period of time. So for example, if you had to work like 3 shifts at your job and you had like a test or something in a class and you were asked to take care of a family member or something like that, right? All of those are factors that we know realistically affect the quality of labor that we put into our work, our academic work, right? The reflections, and we'll talk more about that next week and as we move through. But the reflections seek to acknowledge that, right? That what goes on in our wider sphere of life, right, is going to affect what we're producing academically. And so the reflections, in a sense, seek to acknowledge that. And so in your reflective essays for 1301, you are basically, and I will present you with um, potential questions each time we have a reflection that you can seek to address in those reflections. You don't have to necessarily, but you can seek to address those in your reflections, just to give you ideas for creating that 2 page essay, right? Because some of you might be like, a 2 page essay, what the heck am I gonna, how am I gonna do that? Well, I'll give you some questions that you can ponder to help you do that each time that we have to do a reflection, right? Um, so that's but you'll only have the reflections on weeks we don't have a draft due, right? I'm not going to have you do a reflection and a draft in the same week for 1301. Okay. Now for 1300, I'm going to ask you, I'm only asking you to do 1 page essays per week, except as we get down to the end of the course. There's a couple of small group projects at the end of the course, and I'll get to that in a minute. But typically, I'm asking you, there's 2 different kinds of journals for 1300. One is an invention journal, and this is not necessarily a cohesive essay, but it's like a one page piece where you'll be basically, keeping a record of the different invention exercises that we're doing in class, your assessment of those types of exercises. Basically, it's like your notes, um, and basically, it's showing your work. if you will, right? That's basically what you're turning in, right? And you don't, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in a traditional typed form. It can be, you can make like a collage. You can make like, all it, just basically to show your approach to the invention. So you have some creative leeway with those. So that's the invention journal. And as long as it's one page, and I can see that you're putting effort into it. And again, effort is the key, right? If I can see that you're putting effort into it, then you're going to get your complete on that, right? Now, the other kind of journal, which is also just a page, is your reading journal, and that's going to be just you journaling and reflecting about what specifically about what you've been reading, whether it's for 1301, whether it's for 1300, or even reading outside of that for other classes and so forth. It's an effort to get you to think about your reading and to really begin to think critically about what you're reading. And as we move through the course, you'll have more and more tools with which to do that, right? Um, and some of these concepts that we're covering in here, I'm very excited about because I know with my experience that these concepts are extremely helpful. Let's see, we got somebody just chatted in. Maybe for some reason it didn't pop up. When we read for class, will we be our choice or things you assign to us? Okay, so that's a very good question. Yeah, for 1300 for 1301 and for this class, um, what'll happen is, and it's not apparent right. I realize it's not apparent right now on Blackboard, but beginning next week we'll have folders for each week in Blackboard in course content, and in those folders, right, will be the reading material. Okay, for 1301 and 1300, in the on the different Blackboard sites. But so that brings me to my next thing. So hold that thought for just a second, because it's a both and answer, right? So yes, there will be assigned reading, okay, but also you're going to have some choice in the matter as well, okay. Um, so let me just look at a couple more of these concepts. And again, I invite you to, and we may actually take some time next week to go through this, to have you go through the syllabus in partners or groups. I'm not going to do that today, only because well, we technically have another hour, but I have a doctor's appointment pretty quickly after class, so I might try to end a little early so that I can take care of stuff for my doctor's appointment. But I want to cover some of these concepts with you. So to get a B in the course, so everyone's grade essentially starts at a B, right? To get a B in the course, um, first of all, you need to post everything to Blackboard on the appropriate submission pages, which there aren't any right now, but there will be as we get to turning in stuff. Um, but turning it in on time, okay. It's considered late if it's after the due date. Now, so everything is due at 11:50, unless otherwise noted specifically. Everything is due at 11:59 on the Saturday of the week that it is posted as being due. Okay, 11:59 being Saturday night. Okay, now if you post something at 12:05, I am probably not going to count that late. In fact, I can, um, as I often say, you know, if you talk to my ex-wife, if you talk to several people that know me, and have known me for a while, they might say I'm an asshole, but I'm not that kind of asshole, right? I'm not the kind of asshole that's going to be like, well, okay, they didn't turn it in exactly at 11:59, so I'm going to so I'm going to count it late. No, if it's turned in, you want not. That's not to say that you should make a habit of turning stuff in after 11:59, but you know, by the same token, if it's clear to me that you're trying to get it in before 11:59 and you just for whatever reason there's computer issues or uploading issues, whatever, that's okay, that's understandable, but you want to get it in as close to 11:59 as you possibly can. This that does not mean, and understand this, that does not mean that 2 days later you can email me or text me and be like, yeah, I didn't get my piece, I didn't get my work in because I was sick or whatever. That does not, no, that no, if you're having an issue with something, and this goes for not only my classes, right, but for all your classes, for your job, as a matter of fact, this goes for everything, right? I mean, and it certainly goes for, like, if you're dating somebody, or if you're, in any relational thing, right? Any connection, right, with another human being, right? The courtesy dictates that if there's an issue, right, or if you anticipate an issue, that you communicate at the time that you anticipate that issue, that there's going to be an issue, not after the fact, right? Um, so if you're running late, or you've fallen ill, or whatever the case may be, let me know when it happens, okay? And I'm most likely going to tell you, okay, indicate on the comments or feedback to instructor, the comments to instructor, that in Blackboard, on the submission page, what happened, and that we talked about it, or that we spoke about it, and I will most likely not count it late, or not, or if you're absent, right, I may not count you absent for that, okay? But the key is, you need to communicate ahead of time, or if there's an issue, communicate when the issue happens, not 2 days later, not 3 weeks later, you know. Um, the the exception, right, is, and this has only happened. This is this has only happened once, I think, since I've been teaching at Tamusa. But I had a student who was essentially deported, um, you know, and but even then, you know, uh, the student clearly had email, it's clearly had internet in Mexico, but still chose not to communicate with me until like a month afterwards. So that's still problematic, uh, you know. But anyway, I mean, there are exceptions, right? There are exceptions, but generally speaking, you need to communicate with your instructor. Um, you need to communicate with your instructor fairly quickly, right? Just like if you're on a job, just like if it, same kind of thing. Because all of um, your job would would fire you after like two no shows, right? Treat your academic work like that. You know, treat your academic work like that, and you'll be fine. You know. So, key concepts here on Blackboard. these are the notations that will, where did my cursor go? These are the notations that will show up. 0 means you didn't turn it in at all. Okay. A late is a 2. Incomplete is a 3. And what I mean by incomplete, and this really pisses me off, so please try not to do it. And I'm just being upfront with you, right? I'm just being upfront with you. So an incomplete, for example, if I assign you a 2-page piece, right, and you turn in half a page, that's clearly incomplete. There's no way that you can argue that that's not, okay? Especially in a labor-based or effort-based course, when the emphasis is on not so much the quality of what you create, but the fact that you created something that meets the parameters, right? So if you can't even, you know, type 2 pages, that's an issue. That's an issue, right? So, but anyway, if but sometimes that happens. Sometimes whatever the circumstance may be, life dictates that you only have 10 minutes before you only have from 11:40 to 11:59 to type out something. So you type out a piece of shit, so to speak, and you turn it in. Now, it may be a piece of shit, but you still turned it in, and I have respect for that, right? I have respect for that. So it's better to turn in a piece of shit than not turn anything in at all. That is absolutely bottom line the case. Okay. Because if you don't turn, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, fives across the board is what you want, because that means that you have turned everything in complete and on time. Now, you can get up to a combination of 4 lates or incompletes without losing a letter grade. Okay, on the fifth one, you lose a letter grade. Okay. If you don't turn something in at all, that is a letter grade. Okay. So that's why it's better to turn in a piece of crap than not turn anything in at all. Okay. You've got to turn everything in. To that is the key to doing well in the course, right? Is turning everything in and turning everything in complete. Now, as I said, with regard to the drafting process for 1301, uh, when we move on to like the second draft, I'll ask you, okay, you need to make 2 changes and so on and so forth. So it's not as though you're not improving, because I may be very specific, like in my comments, I may be like, for your second draft, you need to approach this, or you need to look at this, right? And if you haven't done that in your changes, that might be suspect, right? I may be like, well, I don't know if I can count this as complete because they're not addressing the issue that I asked them to address. Now, that doesn't mean you have to address it perfectly, but if I ask you to address an issue, you should still address it, right? Now, that's how to get a B. Okay. Now, to get an A, there's some other things. So this is for 1300. To get an A, um, or no, okay, I should have changed this language in here, because it says based on your argument essay. It should be based on your for 1300. It's going to be based on your it's supposed to be based on your the what you're going to choose for your reading journal, for your uh, outside reading journal. So if you want to get an A in the course, you need to create a 4 to 5 page reading journal, additional reading journal, specifically on a work, a some kind of written work of at least 100 pages, right? Because in postmodern definition of a novel is anything over 100 pages, and that's an official postmodern definition of a novel. So now it could be a graphic novel that qualifies as a novel. And there are a couple of graphic novels that are actually more than a couple of graphic novels that are among the best works of fiction, the best works of literature I've ever read. So you can do, and you'd read a graphic novel. Okay, that's a possibility. You could read, basically anything that's at least 100 pages that is not that's not assigned reading, right? That's other way, and you'll create a reading journal based on that, um, of 4 to 5 pages, and you'll create a short presentation, on that, and I'll give you guidelines on all that as we move forward. But a short presentation based on all that, which theoretically you'll present to the class, depending upon technology issues and such. But and then the other thing is that you'll create for 1300, you'll do 2 encounters with the writing center, um, or conferences with me, and write those up as reflections. So all of that extra stuff is required if you want to get an A in 1300. For 1301, and you can read this on that syllabus as well. You have to do 2 additional um, writing center encounters, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And you have to do a presentation on your yes, we're not even doing an argument. We're going to be doing a profile. So you have to do a presentation on your profile, okay? And you have to do a you have to fully participate in peer editing, right? And I'll give you things to document that on, document the peer editing, right? So to get an A on those, and also for each class you can only, instead of the three. So if you get more than 3 absences, it will cost you a letter grade, right? But if you want to get an A, you can only get 1 absence. Okay. Uh, Now again, if you have documentation of, for example, somebody, if you have documentation of having COVID, for example, and you happen to be, even though we're online, you happen to be taken out for a week, and you just can't, I get that. I mean, I had a friend of mine had COVID, and I was talking to her on the phone, and she coughed, and I mean, her case was mild, right? I mean, her case is mild, and she was coughing, and her cough sounded just horrible, horrible. So I get things like that, but you need to be able to document it, right? And so on. So there are always exceptions, if you will, but the idea is that, ideally you only have 1 absence, and that you complete that extra stuff to get an A. Okay. Um, don't need to worry about Jaguar 1. So this is very, very, very important. Very important. Okay. I will only accept PDF or DocX, not Pages or Google Docs. Please do not try to turn in a Google Doc. Please do not do that. Google Doc and Blackboard do not communicate. They don't go together. Don't do it. Okay? As Temusa students, you all have access to Microsoft 365. So theoretically, you all should be using Microsoft Word. If you have to use Google Doc for whatever reason, like if you're using a Chromebook, you can generate a PDF um, from your Google Doc, but you got to make sure that that PDF saves to your hard drive before you try to upload it to Blackboard. Okay. And if you don't know how to do that, if you don't know how to generate a PDF from a Google Doc, look it up on YouTube. Okay. So, again, the primary concepts for the course: the invention journal, and that's just like your exercises in class that you'll be doing. Your reading journal, again, and I invite you and I encourage you to read through this. But your reading journal is basically about reflecting on what you're reading. Okay. And then towards the end of the course, you'll do um, you'll do 3 small essays uh, in groups and partnerships, and then finally the last one on your own. Basically, um, where you'll choose various articles and choose from various articles, and then apply the techniques we'll be looking at and learning in class. Okay. Important point: I do not drop for non-attendance. So if you don't show up, you fail. If you don't drop yourself, right? So if you plan on not showing up and whatnot, you need to drop yourself because I will not do it. Um, Nor do I assign I grades. Okay, again, except in extreme circumstances. Okay, all right, you all know this stuff. You've seen this. You see this on all your syllabi. So I just hopefully you have taken the time to read through some of this. Important dates. You can kind of just glance at this schedule here. Granted, there's not a whole lot here in terms of specifics, other than telling you, what we'll be covering on a given week, and what's due that week. So for this class, for example, your first reading journal is due next week, and so forth. And you can kind of see, go through. Um, Now, you can turn in late work, right, up to the 14th week of the course, okay, which is April 24th. You can turn in late work up to then. Now, if you don't, so if you turn in something um, longer than 2 weeks from when it was originally due, I am not obligated to comment on it. Okay, in other words, you'll still get credit for it, but it goes to the bottom of the stack, if you will, right? If you turn it in longer than 2 weeks late. Now, you may not receive comments on everything. In fact, you probably won't receive comments on everything you turn in anyway. But if you turn it in really late, the likelihood of receiving specific comments goes way, way, way down. And also, you don't want to do that. You don't want to make a habit of doing that. For one, the late work starts to ticket your grade, right? You start out at a B, and it begins to tick down. And and honestly, if you don't if you turn in all your stuff late, whether you do stuff to you know whether you do all the stuff to make an A or not is not going to matter, because you've got all this late work. So getting an A is, I mean, you won't be able to get an A if you got a crap ton of late work. It just isn't going to happen. So you got to think about that. Okay. Um, and also, you don't want to get yourself in a situation where everything is stacked up. Here, where I'm asking you for all your stuff for getting an A, all your late work and all this stuff is all coming due on the 24th. You don't want to be faced with this, and it's that way for both sections. So you don't want to be faced with like, oh crap, I've got like 5 late assignments, and I've still got to do. You don't want to have to be trying to do all that in a single weekend or whatever. Now, for some of you, hopefully that's not going to happen. But for some of you, if it's the only way that you can pass, then that you may have to do that. But I really hope not. Um, okay, I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to pull up my real quick. I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to pull up my. I'm going to do an additional screen share, and I'm going to share the other syllabus for 1301. A lot of this is exactly the same, so there's not a whole lot more to go over, except for the specific assignments. So to get an A for this class, so to earn an A, um, yeah, you'll do a presentation based on your profile. You need to have only one absence and the 2 additional reflective essays. So that's the same stuff. Now, let me speak a moment to the writing center for you guys. Course comes with some additional perks, right? You get some perks that other 1301 students don't have. You have your own writing tutors, right? That are specifically for you, that are going to be following your course, these courses, so that when you go to the writing center, particularly on Fridays, there's going to be designated times on Fridays. And by go to the writing center, you can go to the writing. You can go via. I don't know why I froze there. Hopefully, you can still hear me. Um, but you can go to the writing center um, virtually, um, and you can interact with these specific tutors, um, and they will help you, and you can then write on that, as well as also when you write your invention reflection and so forth, you can comment on your interaction with the writing center there also. So hopefully you'll make a habit of going to the writing center. Not so much, a lot of times, and this is cultural too. I mean, and by cultural I mean like the culture of, say, high school, for example. I know that when I was in high school, it was like a stigma almost at seeking any kind of tutoring or any kind of help or whatever. And you know, um, hopefully you'll begin to see it not so much as that, but more as this resource. There's just is this resource that's available to help take pressure off of you, right? To help, again, these courses are all about the idea. At least what I want to get across and what I want to emphasize is this idea of um, relieving anxiety, right? So the writing center is yet another way, right, for you to potentially relieve anxiety, right, in creating your stuff. So again, there'll be weekly folders. So beginning next week, you'll have a week 2 folder in 1301 and in 1300 where you can see like readings and videos and different things. Um, Especially, since we're not meeting until Thursday, hopefully by Tuesday of every week. I'll have everything up so you can you can look and see what's in there and what you want to familiar yourself. Eh, pardon me, familiarize yourself with by Thursday, right? So that you can you can then you know be ready for class. So again, we'll have groups, the same groups as 1300 ideally for 1301, and we'll go through doing that next week. Same sort of thing. So two projects really for 1301. One and we'll go through them in stages. But one is a narrative. You're going to basically write a story, right? A story in which you are the central character, right? It's going to be a story from your life, if you will. Um, Embellished, perhaps, maybe not, but we'll get into the details of it as we move through the discussion. But it yeah, you're going to write a story, and then you're going to do an investigative profile, and this is
Hello? Oh, damn it. Oh, bro.
Hello?
Hello?
Was oh the teacher left?
Did you leave?
I don't know. I think he did.
Because class wasn't supposed to be done until, well,
12:15.
12 to, yeah, 12:15.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Mhm.
So,
His internet probably cut out or something. So
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I
we
think so.
do.
Do we have? Do you
probably.
think we
What
have
was
a
the last
slide?
thing he said?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I kind of
To be
missed that
honest, I
part.
have no idea. I'm so confused.
Me too. Oh my god, I'm so like confused. We should make a group like so we like if we have questions like we could like text in the group, talk about it.
The last
Yeah,
thing
that's
we
true.
was talking about was writing a story about ourselves.
About 100 like 5 page, right?
Yeah, it was like 5 pages.
Yeah,
He like at the end of the
5
syllabus.
pages.
Yeah, that's what I heard, like 5 pages.
Dang.
But I don't know about what, like like what we write about.
Oh, they said he's here.
Oh, he's here now. Oh,
Yeah.
let me mute myself.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Are you sure he's here? Because he's not talking or anything like that. uh,
I don't think it's here.
well, he did say he had an appointment, but he said he would
okay.
leave like
For
towards
some
the
for some
end.
reason, can you hear me? You
Yes,
hear me? Okay.
yes, sir.
For some reason I can't see you.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
Like you can't see like the
I
the
can hear
recording,
you.
like the class?
Yeah, no, yeah, I can't. Like something weird just happened. Um, uh, yeah, like I can't. That is so strange. Um,
Why don't you leave the class and try logging back in?
yeah, actually, I'm just gonna conclude the class. Yeah, it says the class is still recording. I get that. I'm just gonna conclude the class because I was basically more or less done talking anyway. I don't know what happened. This is so weird. This is just totally weird. Um, yeah. So we'll just begin again on Thursday. And I'll get with you. I'll put stuff up on Blackboard and announcements and so on. Yeah, so this will be on this will be on YouTube. Yeah, and whatever it is that actually recorded will be on YouTube. Um so what'll happen, I think I'm so can everybody still hear me? Okay, so what'll happen, I'm just looking at the chat. So on my syllabus is my Google Voice number that you can use to contact me. What'll happen next time is we'll do breakout rooms, and with that, oh, hold on. Okay, yeah. So what'll happen next time is we'll do breakout rooms, and in your breakout rooms you can communicate with one another and exchange like phone numbers and that sort of thing. And then you can go on, and then there'll be groups. I'll create groups on Blackboard for you to join, and you can use that space as well, right? So basically there'll be breakout rooms on Zoom where we'll do stuff actually in class live, right? And then when we're not in class, you'll have the option of using your groups on Blackboard. Um, or you can work quote unquote offline, like via your phones or whatever, however you feel more comfortable. But the groups on Blackboard are going to give you like a whole lot of resources, within the Blackboard setting. So you might want to have that option. Once I get that set up for you, you might want to go in there and look at the different options that you'll have available, because you'll be able to do file exchange, you'll be able to do chat, you'll be able to do video to video, like this, but through a Blackboard group. In case you don't have Zoom, for example, you don't have the full on Zoom. Um, so anyway, I don't know what happened. I don't know why my screen freaked out. But I'll see if I can figure all that out. But anyway, have a wonderful weekend. It was great to meet everybody, or talk with everybody. And I will get back with you via announcements and everything. But yeah, I do have a doctor's appointment coming up. So I will let y'all go. Okay. Have a great
Eh,
weekend.
guys, so if you leave, we can stay on here, and since you'll stop the recording, we can do the exchange.
Actually, I
Yeah.
have to, hold on, let me stop the recording. But I have to, when I hit end,
I think you can. I think you can leave, and
it does
I
say,
think maybe you'll
I
let
can
us.
leave. Let me see if I can stop the recording. Hold on. Yeah.